Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, how liminal are you? How liminal can you get? What is liminal? We experience it all the time. We just don't know it. And it's a good thing to know about it so that we can use it to our advantage. It's always been a mystery to me of having these liminal experiences. And I'm so glad to get to the bottom of it by introducing and interviewing the author of a book called Liminal Dreaming, Exploring Consciousness at the Edge of Sleep. And I welcome Jennifer Dumpert to the show. Jennifer, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you wrote this book. And this is very exciting to me to talk to you about a subject matter that I've been so aware of, because so many times where I drift off, I'm in another world. And it's a very real world. And yet, as soon as I snap out of it, that world disappears. And it's like, wait a minute, but that's the world that I know, and yet I don't know it.
Mm.
So, because in my real world, it doesn't exist. It only exists when I drift off. And then there are people talking, things happening. It's like, oh yeah, and yet it's not real. So what is real? And you're somebody who has really studied this for a long time and understand it and use it to great advantage. So can you explain a little bit about this liminal state that we get into?
Sure. So liminal, which is, of course, from the Latin limen, like a doorway or a threshold, where we get words like limit. And liminal is the in-between zones, something that's kind of the neither here nor there. And so liminal dreaming is the space between awake and asleep. And people tend to think of that as kind of binary, on, off, asleep. But in fact, there's a whole spectrum of experience between the two, which is this sort of free, associative, kaleidoscopic, mostly non-narrative dream space as you're falling asleep, hypnagogia, and as you're waking up, hypnopompia. And the dreams that happen in these states, they're not quite like REM dreams, but it's a very amazing, very different experience. This sort of psychedelic tour of your internal worlds.
Right, and yet we don't understand it, because in our dreams, our REM dreams, and in your book you talk about we can even be dreaming when we're not in a REM state at night, or many different stages of sleep, and yet this liminal states, hypnagogia or hypnopompia, are states where we're either falling asleep or waking up, and we're conscious but still dreaming, and or not yet dreaming, but when we're going to sleep, and even during the day, when I kind of lose my present consciousness, get sleepy, but I haven't fallen asleep, I can be in another world. And this other world is what we're talking about, that
Right.
Isn't the same as REM dreams, which are much more associated with symbols in our lives and stories that we get involved in. But
Yeah.
this liminal state, we're more of a witness to, because it doesn't have the same kind of storyline associated with it.
Right, exactly. So REM dreams are much more kind of like waking life, where you're a person in a world. I mean, it's weirder, you might be on on another planet with squirrels or whatever it is, but it's usually pretty credible. When you're in that world, you're having experiences much like you do when you're awake, and you just think that you're having a normal experience. Whereas liminal dreams it's a very different kind of consciousness, which is part of what's so interesting about it. So I often see these kaleidoscopic sets of images or memories or thoughts, but it's not like it's me in a place. It's like there's just what's happening. And it's important to mention what you pointed out, which is that in liminal dream states, your conscious waking mind is still online. You are aware of where you are. You can be listening to the sounds outside and acknowledging them. I can hear the clock strike 5 and say, oh, it's 5, or there's my neighbor, and understand what's happening. And yet I'm also in the unconscious. I'm also in this very strange dream state of the unconscious. So it facilitates an enormous amount. I mean, a lot of the ways that liminal dreams are used and have been used by lots of people and cultures for a very long time is because of that factor, because it gives your waking mind access to what is in your subconscious. Like normally those two are fairly split apart, again, awaking and sleep. But you can be 25% dreaming and 75% awake, or the other way around, or half and half. And those liminal experiences, they give a lot of you can see a lot that normally is hidden from your waking mind, because you just have this direct access into the subconscious or the unconscious.
Well, to me, like the elephant in the room is, what is this subconscious? Who is it that has such power of presenting us these different states in full form? It's like they come out of the, so I think my sense is that we're tapping into, certainly in liminal dreams, tapping into other realities that are there, and we're just tapping in and getting to see. I think of it as there's another world that knows me, I know it, but not to the extent of real clarity. It's just that these people show up in voices, and I hear conversations, and I see actions. And it's mostly people oriented. And
you have a lot of people in your liminal dream states.
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty common, and especially in hypnagogia, where you'll often get like faces turning toward you or crowds. And also you mentioned sound. It's a very aural space. A lot like whispering. I have voices actually saying something directly in my ear, or the distant sound of Victrola, something along those lines. And, consciousness is, of course, in a lot of ways, like the big question, what is consciousness? And it's also the amazing thing, right? The big amazing, in a way, is consciousness. I mean, as humans, to be able to be self-aware and think about our experience. And there's a lot of ways to use liminal dreaming. Artists, inventors, creators. I mean, it's mental healing. We can get into some of that if you want. But one of the things that I love most about it is just consciousness exploration. Going in and playing with mind, getting this kind of tour of what's in there, what's happening, when the waking ego has such a firm grasp, right? I mean, most of us are, we're propelled all day by who we think we should be, or what our goals are, or whatever. The rational waking mind really drives the show. And when you're part of the thing that's amazing is when you're in a dream state, that lets go, right? That mind doesn't have as much the control over you. And so whatever arises. So it's a way of thinking about mind or playing with mind. Liminal dreams are great because it's a state that you rarely get to experience.
Although the ego of our society doesn't want to respect that. They want to discard it, actually. Oh, that's just a dream. It's just your imagination. And actually, you have a lot in your book about imagination. And it's really important to appreciate the power of our imagination, what it means, and not to take it lightly. It actually is the way that we create.
Exactly. I mean, and the Sufi idea that imagination is a faculty of perception as much as vision or taste, or, hearing. And, one of the things that the Sufis say is that you can't directly experience the divine. You can only imagine it. And in that sense, imagination is the most important faculty of perception. But the extent to which, and you're right, we totally undervalue dreaming and imagination. Oh, you just imagined that. Oh, that was just a dream, that kind of thing. But imagination is a faculty of perception. Even vision, which is what we privilege. Oh, I see, as a way of understanding. Seeing is believing. But an enormous amount of even vision is actually imagination, is what you expect to see, or what you think will be there, because the sensorium is so huge. What we're taking in is so huge that we actually have to sort it out with our imagination, with what's happening internally. So even what we see, which is for us, like the basis of fact, an enormous amount of that is imagination.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm an intuitive, and I've been a practicing intuitive for 20 some odd years. And so I can listen and hear information coming through that's not of my own mind, because it's information about things I would have no idea to know about. And same thing with vision. So I can see things and hear things that are coming from another consciousness to inform me, so that I can inform others or inform myself. And so I do that all day long. I'm always asking for a higher guidance from the universe, and it comes through in the form of, that must be your imagination. And yet it's information that's very corroborative, that there are things that I know, that I'm told, and about all kinds of data. And so to me, imagination is actually a receiver of data.
I have a lot of practices. And what I'm doing in the book is I give a lot of exercises and practices.
Yes.
I'm very practical minded, and I really want people to experience liminal dream, not just to think about it. The ideas are cool, but to go and actually play with hypnagogia and hypnopompia and see what comes up, and come up with their own practices. I've got one recently that that actually isn't in the book, because it's a newer. I've started doing it really since I wrote the book, but it's a kind of a form of automatic writing. So, like the original automatic writing back to John Dee, with, his Enochian angels, and getting information downloads through automatic writing, where he would just take pen in hand and let them flow through him. And, he came the Enochian language and what he got from them. And of course, the Dadaists had a form of automatic writing as well. And I've discovered that I can, because I can touch type, that I can get into a hypnagogic dream space as long as it's like light enough, and I can actually type out what's happening.
Wow.
Sort of type out the narrative. And so there's kind of like these missives from inside the dream world, and that's actually pretty cool. In the book I talk about using a voice activated recorder and talking through hypnagogia, which also is a practice. And I've discovered that there's because with the touch typing, with the automatic writing, I can only do if I'm much closer to awake. So maybe I'm 20% dreaming and 80% awake, and then from there I can touch type. And it's voice activated recorder. I can, as long as I'm kind of 50% awake or more, I can kind of mumble through the voice activated recorder. And they're different, right? They have different flavors of the hypnagogia, right? With the automatic writing, there's a lot of wordplay. There's a lot of, kind of images. Like further in, voice activated recorder, much more like, like
your voice
characters.
is up a little bit, by the way.
Oh, sorry about that.
I think it's just because you're moving your head around a lot.
Oh, yeah, I get pretty excited.
Yeah.
I often gesticulate when I'm on the phone. I'll try to be still.
No, this is exciting. It's inspiring because your experience with it takes it to a level that a lot of people would like to take it. And yet you do it through a lot of exercises that, and many are in your book and this new one, in different ways that you stay conscious and explore this in-between world. And it's very exciting to me. It's made it more fun to go to sleep at night.
For sure.
Yes, because as I lie down, I go, it's like, oh, good. I don't even have to worry about going to sleep. I just want to get into a liminal state and explore this in-between state. And then, as you say in the book, that vanishes. It's all of a sudden, then we're in deep sleep, and at some point we'll start to have dreams. But it's so much fun now, going to sleep and getting up, to remember to notice, or even to look forward, going to sleep in hypnagogia.
And actually, I've worked with people who have insomnia, and liminal dreaming is a great way of dealing with insomnia. Not because it necessarily makes you go to sleep faster or anything like that, but it means, a lot of people who suffer from insomnia, going to sleep is an unpleasant experience.
Stressful.
And they often worry, like they lie there worrying about the fact that they're not getting enough sleep. And so when people, I've worked with some people who have had, pretty bad insomnia, and the way that it works is it becomes a pleasurable experience. Like you're lying in bed and it's interesting. And so you start to look forward to lying in bed and going in hypnagogia because it's so interesting. And then your mind relaxes and your body relaxes, and almost paradoxically, it starts to improve people's ability to sleep, because the act, like the transition from waking to sleep, it becomes an interesting place, and that in and of itself resolves a lot of the issues.
And I like the idea that it takes the stress away of worrying about sleeping. Instead, we're enjoying the process of these in-between stages.
Yeah, exactly. And in the book, I talk a lot about what I call liminal mind. And, that is partly the valuing of imagination, understanding imagination as a faculty of perception, and also learning to be in that middle zone, to not be looking at things in the black and white. For example, like psychogeography, the way that we encode places with our own histories, right? So, this is the street corner where I had my first kiss, or this is where I saw a terrible accident, or, I love cats, so these are the houses where the cats are, whatever. It's like, any place has your own personal map superimposed on it. So the place is both a physical place that's completely independent of you, and yet it's also completely dependent on you, right? The actual buildings themselves are encoded with your own experience. And to be able to go back and forth between the external reality that's there, whether you are or not, and the way that you're projecting your experience onto the world around you, and that it's also that. So that's kind of part what I mean by liminal mind, is that sort of that slipping back and forth between the shared consensus reality that we all have, and understanding that to a certain degree you're creating your environment and your circumstance.
And so this is all about different stages of consciousness that we go through day and night. And at any time, we can relax, maybe start one of the exercises from your book, and just get ourselves into that state where anything can happen. And
it's true.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to the point now. I'm obviously very well practiced. Liminal dreaming is my primary practice. I've had a life of like meditation practices and yoga practices, and these days, liminal dreaming is kind of my primary practice. And I've gotten to the point where I can slip into it pretty much at will. And what that means is that I have, whatever I'm on a park bench, or I'm just in my living room, and I just, can close my eyes and, and go into this. I mean, it's kind of like that's the perfect psychedelic, right? Because it's, because the experience itself is a very psychedelic experience, and yet you can just slip in and out of it at will, and have these.
I just, sorry to interrupt, but had this idea that, we talk about different brain waves, and in the book you explore different brain waves. But in hypnagogia, it's not clear which of the brain waves are at play. There's alpha, and there's delta, theta, and all of them, delta. But to me, when I'm very intuitive, I know that I'm really in a state of alpha, and maybe a little bit of theta. And so that's really very important, that through this practice of working liminally, we get to open ourselves to different brain waves that are useful.
Yeah, and most, because brains are chemical electricity, and as most people know, we measure brains with EEG, so brain waves, right? So like right now, we're pretty engaged in this conversation. We're probably in like beta, going 8 to 13 waves per second. And most brainwave states are marked by one particular sine wave. Theta has 2, but liminal dream states have 9, right? So it's by far, without practice, by far the shortest brainwave state. Most people only spend a few in it, maybe 8 or 10, on the way into sleep or on the way out of sleep. Although I can spend hours there. So it's by far naturally the shortest brainwave state, and yet it's definitely the most complicated and chaotic. That's what, like when your arm jerks or your leg jerks, a hypnic jerk, it's that's you're in hypnagogia when that happens. And that's kind of your body doing what your brainwaves are doing. It's kind of like chaotic jerking around. And so it's to think about that objectively, that it's it's subjectively really one of the strangest states that we experience, and objectively is also the strangest brainwave state that we experience. And everybody does it. Like, so people often ask me about lucid dreaming. Is this lucid dreaming? No, it's different from lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is something that you do in REM, and you're kind of controlling the dream in lucid dreaming, and there's usually, again, a subject object. It's me in a world. Whereas in liminal dreams, it's mostly kind of what's happening, and they generally move too fast. It'd be very hard to control them. But the people talk about the strangeness of this experience, and it is both subjectively and objectively. It's a very unusual state that everybody goes through. I mean, there are some people who are natural lucid dreamers, but most of us have to work really hard to have that experience. But everybody goes through hypnagogia and hypnopompia. And in fact, often when I tell people about it, they're like, "Oh, that thing. I mean, I have the experience. I just never knew it was a thing."
Right.
Like, yeah.
That's what's so perfect about this is your book, Liminal Dreaming, Exploring Consciousness at the Edge of Sleep. It's so important for people to get this book and to start exploring their minds and their experiences in ways that they haven't really understood before.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, and consciousness exploration is one of the best things about being human. I mean, we're hardwired to it. Little kids spin around in circles and roll down hills, and adults do all manner of things just to experiment with mind. And so this is like a marvelous way to achieve that end.
Yeah, this is great. And is there a website?
Is there a website? Yes, urbandreamscape.com, or actually probably easier, liminaldreaming.com. And from liminaldreaming.com, you can get to all of my different sites. I mean, I've been doing dream work for 20 years or so. So I have other forms of dream work, but liminal dreaming is currently my favorite.
You know, I'm so thrilled to talk with you and to have read your book, because it really is allowing me to enjoy another aspect of how my mind has been operating that I was just curious about before, without knowing that you can actually study this and
right, the whole, it's the thing. And I mean, and one of the things that's really great about it is, like, now, like, anybody, like, with your audience, now that you have realized that it's a thing, that hypnagogia or hypnopompia has a name and it's a state that you can go in and explore, almost everybody will now have the experience. Because we all have it naturally, all that's really required is for someone to say, hey, next time you're going through that, as you're falling asleep and you're having that, maybe you're hearing distant sounds, or you're having this different kind of dream, pay attention to it, because it's a thing. Right. Or as you're waking up and you start to form an idea, and then you realize that what you thought was an idea is actually changed back into being a dream, and that really drifty morning hypnopompia. Again, like, pay attention to it for a moment, and like this whole world of crazy experience, will flower.
That's
I've gotten to the point now where I can, one of my other current favorite practices is having my mind like running like 6 different dreams simultaneously, which I can do. So it's like on 6 different tracks, and I actually have a story about that in the book, at a yoga nidra training when I was doing one of my yoga nidra teacher trainings, and getting to the place where I was like, and like these 6 different worlds that I could see from a high level, and then yet each one with like infinite little detail, so like now I like try to see how much I can hold in my mind at once, like in a hypnagogic state. It can be pretty vast, and it's an amazing experience.
That's very inspiring. So I hope people not only get your book, but go to your website too, and get to learn more about what you can do, which means that other people can do it too.
That's exactly right.
Great. So
Thank
Jennifer Dumpert, thank you so much for being a guest on Energy Stew. It's such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank
you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.fm. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.